right, I think we're ready to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Chair Berman.
Here.
Councilmember Burt. Councilmember Holman.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Niss.
Here.
4 present.
All right, thank you very much. And so the first item on the agenda is oral communications. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to an item not on the agenda this evening? We haven't received any cards. Thank you. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 1, which is proposed changes in development impact fees, implementation of new public safety facility, and general government facilities fees. And I believe staff has a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chair Berman, members of the Finance Committee, Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer. I'll start with a quick update as to where we're at. And I have Nate Perez from DTA who's here to help us explain the process that he took to develop the new fee recommendations for tonight. So as I might just restate for the record, we were in the process of reviewing our development impact fees. We started that with a benchmark study conducted by DTNA. The process called for the development of a project needs list. They took several months with several iterations with various departments, and we created some pretty big list in terms of items of needs. The process was helped as a result of the IBRIC having done the exercise as well, so we had a starting point, obviously. Just to remind you, from the total project cost or the net project cost of those needs, only 15% can be attributed to new development. So the vast majority of the dollars get allocated to current residents and inhabitants of Palo Alto. So it's a very small number. We brought that list to you and made the recommendations that based on the list and the narrow amount, there was really no need to make an adjustment because they were, when they were set back when, that those project lists addressed those needs and it was still going forward. What we suggested to you that we concentrate on 2 new fees, and I'll get into a little more details. You discussed that in November, made the recommendation to go forward to council. We had a lengthy discussion at council. I think part of our learning lesson, just so you know that we did pay attention, was that we kind of narrowed it really to the new fees, but we probably needed to give a background information to the council so they would have the whole picture. Similar to the discussion we had a little bit earlier about the cost of service study. So I think we learned a lesson on how to bring the information to you. Getting to the point, the council has accepted the list of projects for the 2 new fees, suggested that we come back to them by the first meeting in June, so that's why we're here in front of you, this first meeting in May. DTA took the completed nexus study and developed the impact fees in April. And so the process that we're recommending to you is that you review those, and then the council reviews your recommendation. So part of what we are going to ask you to do is to implement 2 new fees. One for public safety facility fees, second one for general government facility fees, and as I mentioned, there is no changes recommended to the current existing fees at the moment. So let me turn it over to Nate, who's going to give you his update on the work that he has done. Yes.
Sure. Good evening, council members. Good seeing you again. I see 2 new members of the Finance Committee since we last met in November. We took the approved needs list, and my firm, we went into our cubicles in our little black box, and now we've come back with proposed fee amounts that satisfy the legal and technical requirements of Government Code 66,000, otherwise known as the Fee Mitigation Act, AB 1600. It has many names. The goal of AB 1600 is to demand that new development only pay its fair share. We're not allowed to charge existing deficiencies to new development. That is the essence of this study. It is the essence of the discussion of levels of service and the arithmetic. If you remember that, that really drives everything we're doing here. On the first page, again, just sort of a general summary. Pardon me? Oh, sorry.
How do I do that?
Am I pressing the buttons? Excellent. The fee calculations provided in this draft Nexus study to you this evening employ the concept of an equivalent dwelling unit, sometimes called an EDU or an EBU, sometimes an ERU too. The sense of that is to really equalize or normalize the impact of residential versus non-residential developments. How does a home equal 1,000 square feet of commercial? How does a home equal 1,000 square feet of non-industrial? It is difficult, and there's, a bit of art that goes with the science in that process, and we certainly attempt to do our best. The demographics included in the city were provided by the planning department. I confirm them generally against ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and the U.S. Census. The planning department was very adamant about its own jobs projections, so we use those. Not a very large differential, maybe 5% off ABAG, but we did confirm them generally. To Lalo's point, the study is, Palo Alto is largely built out. There may be a 15,000 home master plan community being annexed into the city that I don't know about. I don't think so. It's an older city, it's a wonderful city, but it is an older city.
Excuse me, Gennady, that was just a hypothetical.
Just a hypothetical? It may be, certainly. And so I like to compare, City of Palo Alto recently did a Nexus study, North State and Butte County, 17, 20,000 home communities projected. The allocation to new development is very, very different. So generally only about 15%, maybe 15 to 20%, depending on the actual facility. And we do that through looking at the level of service and maintaining that idea that we're only charging new development its fair share. The next page is a little dense. These are the 5 technical Nexus requirements. I don't know if there are any attorneys on the committee. You may enjoy this, you may not. It's really just a form of identification. And the bottom 3, you see some similarities, that reasonable relationship. Sort of this trident is a bit cumbersome verbally. I think it's better explained mathematically, and again, it really is. Fair share to new development, we're not going to cure existing deficiencies. And if you keep that in mind, that is how we satisfy those bottom 3. The top 2, identifying the purpose of the fee. We've done that with the needs list. We've identified the public safety building. We've identified the IT upgrades. So moving on, a little bit of specifics. These are the public safety facilities. This is the public safety element of the needs list that was approved by council. Just as a refresher, you can see that $96 million number. Maybe keep that in the back of your mind. Generally, the nexus is that new development demands public safety facilities. They call the police department. They call the fire department. This is, I don't want to call it a no-brainer, but this is one of the easier nexuses to determine and to find. We have allocated the cost of the facilities to new development based on that fair share that I discussed earlier. General government, we see the number is $86 million for the needs list that was approved by council. Again, new development demands general government facilities, whether it's use of clerks, whether it's council time, whether it's Lalo's time, whatever it may be, it is very real, and it needs to be allocated its fair share. Moving forward, some concrete numbers. Hopefully, no one's choking or gagging or going yippee. But these are the product of the Nexus study and the allocation, first between existing and new development, and then within new development between the various land use categories. So generally, if we think about this as the 15 to 20% that we've allocated to new development, this is how we've spread it across the projected new development classes. Single family, multifamily on the residential side. The difference between those two factors, it's not stated here, but I will share this, is generally the persons per household. Single family homes typically and in Palo Alto have more people. It's a simple usage factor, and that is the exact ratio between those two fee levels. On the non-residential side, we're looking at employee usage factors. How many employees generally per 1,000 square feet? Commercial tends to demand a little bit more. I know these things change. They change in different, they vary per community and per parts of a community, but generally commercial demands more, office less, industrial even less, and that's the usage factors that are baked into that equivalent dwelling unit reference I made earlier. Total revenue projections. I gave you the 86 million and the 96 million earlier. We can see how they've become 22 million and 13 million. Actually, I reversed them actually. So the 13 million would be out of the 86 million. But you can see how much is not able to be allocated to new development. I think this is a conservative approach. The more we allocate to new development, the higher these fees are going to be. So that's the push-pull there, the desire to provide palatable fees to the development community, but also the desire to raise more revenue for the city. I'm very much in conflict, and I can't answer that. I think that's might be for you guys. So the recommendations and next steps, Finance Committee approval, comments. I would ask that maybe anything particularly mathematical be left, and we can do that through the Planning Department, the Finance Department, and I will respond. I think I've demonstrated respond to every question that they've asked over the last several years, but don't make me do long division on the spot. And then approval, send it to the full council. Approval of the Nexus study and the municipal fee ordinance associated with it, and ultimately 2 new fees and additional revenue for the city. Thank you. Questions?
Sorry.
Yeah,
Let me make a couple where you're at in terms of the decision points. So DTA has laid out the maximum or cost recovery fee levels for the 2 new fees. So for you tonight, the Finance Committee, you can choose whether to adopt the new fees. We recommend that you do. At what fee levels? We're recommending 75%. 75% is consistent with the prior levels of the development impact fees that currently exist. The reasoning behind that is that we're following prior Finance Council level of acceptance based on the benchmarking in comparison to other agencies. Now, you could choose a different direction. You can choose higher or lower than that 75% that we recommend. We're also recommending that you keep with the general exemptions in the current fee structure, and that be the same for these 2 new fees. And then I have one correction that I think it's important to note. Packet page 7, where we talk about the public safety building. Just as a reminder, we had this discussion at the council. The question was, well, if it looks like the city is going to identify a source of funding for this, why would we include it? Well, we will make that adjustment if you give us that direction once that final determination is made. So for now, we're going to continue as the decision pending. But the correction that I have is we state in there that we are earmarking a proposed 2% TOT increase as a revenue stream for the PSB. And that's not the case. It's the revenues from the new hotel buildings. And we didn't catch that, so I apologize for that. And so we want to go on the record of that correction. With that, we're ready for questions.
So before I turn to colleagues, let me make sure that there are no members of the public that want to speak to this item. Nope, thank you. So I'll turn to colleagues.
I'm going to do the bold thing. I'm going to try a motion. I read through this pretty carefully. I can see what you've done. We're certainly not Butte County, and you're right. We're a pretty built-out community. And so I would move the recommendation, which is on page 3 of the packet. And it says we've reviewed the development impact fees justification study prepared and so forth, and recommend that we review the report and approve the recommended new public safety facility and general government facility impact fees of 75% of the maximum allowable level.
I'll second it, although I want to hear what colleagues have to say as well.
Yeah, well, yes,
Yes.
I would hope so. Do you want me to briefly speak to that? So, looking at this, I think it would always be tempting to go higher, but taking a look at this, I think this is the one that actually makes sense. And also looking at this from an individual house standpoint, it also added up. And one of the things that tell me your first name again, I'm sorry. Nate.
Nate.
So what I understand from this is that any new house, if it is built on, if it in some way is either an improvement or if it is a house that was there before, it's not impacted in any way because the impact fees had been woven into that before. So I think it stays fair, and I think your table that was on page 3 went through this and documented when we could update it, when we could not update it, and precisely why you stayed in the 2 areas that you stayed in. So all I have to add at the moment.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions, comments? Karen?
Yes, I do have questions. When this went to council previously, I asked about commercial impact fee rates, and the response was that our commercial rates are low. But I don't see that being reflected here. And I'll go to packet page 6, I think is where I want to go. And you look at the 2 charts on total fees by type, and total fees as average home price. And that includes, in that second chart, it includes office fees, retail, industrial fees. So if you look at those numbers and percentages, they are low. So how are we accounting for those differences? And then the other thing is, I'd ask Lalo if he could get a clarification for me, because the descriptions on, and I don't, okay, the descriptions on those charts on packet page 6 compared to packet page 34 are different, because on page 4 there are office fees and then there's retail/industrial, and on packet page 34 it's commercial, office, institutional, and industrial. So I'm not sure how those all line out, because as was stated in the presentation, different classifications of non-residential use have different demand. And I'm going to roll one more question into this whole thing, is because our daytime demand for emergency services is much greater than our nighttime demand for emergency services. So that tells me that the commercial, or excuse me, I should say non-residential demand is greater than residential, because it adds another layer on top of that. So that speaks to me again, and I'm looking forward to your response here, but that says to me again that it looks like our impact fees for commercial or non-residential are indeed low, as was represented by, I believe it was you, Nate, when this came to the council. So a long-winded question, but
Sure,
there's a lot
I'll
there, so
try
you
to,
can chew
we
on
might
it.
have to go back to point 1.
You can chew on it as you wish.
I think the second point about the reflection in the benchmarking study, how it was grouped, I believe was a product of how your affordable housing fee, which is high, not high, but it is a substantial fee. I believe it's only charged to commercial and then industrial research development. It skips office, I believe. And so I just sort of grouped them to save a slide, and also because folks aren't, especially in communities like this, aren't typically interested in industrial fees. But we were always planning on doing the sort of more standard retail, office, industrial. I apologize for the way it was grouped. I believe I tried to use some red, bold letters to reflect that, but that was just a presentational choice mistake in the benchmarking study. We were always thinking of them in the categories applied here. I just reflected them for purposes of that affordable housing fee, I collapsed commercial and industrial because that fee, that one affordable housing fee was doing so much of the heavy lifting, if that says that.
I'm not following that. Is what you're saying, and pardon me if I'm missing this, but is what you're saying that office isn't charged an affordable housing impact fee? It's a industrial, and I'm lost on that.
Correct, yes. Yes, the specific fee that was a very large chunk of the bar graph in question, I believe $17.97, was not charged to office. And if we could find that graph at the back, I believe that's why we grouped them as such, to sort of just make it a bit cleaner to review. Here we go. There we go. Yes, so page 62 at the bottom. Correct, that $17.97 charge is not being levied on office. And that is why we grouped it that way.
This is the tiny type. I mentioned this.
I
This is the tiny type.
Sorry.
On this chart. So I think we may have all missed that. So if you can say that again, please.
The $17.97 charge, which I circled in bolded red, which doesn't show up, recognizing there was going to be a point of discussion, and this was 2 years ago, is only applied to retail and industrial and not office. And so I think just for presentational purposes, we decided to show it like that. But it was not our intention to group future fees like this. This was just for purposes of that one fee. So apologize. Not the cleanest way to do it, but.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. It should just demand a third slide, which we can provide.
Okay,
if you
so
like.
that speaks to the groupings, and I'm not absolutely comfortable with that. That speaks to the groupings. But what about the fact that our impact fees are low on our non-residential and the demand for daytime? And I could be wrong here, but I remember reading this more than once, that Chief Nickel was here, that our daytime demand for emergency services is much higher than our evening. So that tells me that there's an impact that the non-residential should be paying that they're not.
Okay. The current proposed fee structure is roughly 60-40, residential, non-residential. We can take a look at modifying that. That's typically within the range of acceptable. Tilting it more heavily non-residential does pose some problems, especially mathematically, because some residents are employees, and they are the same people demanding those services. They just happen to be at work. And so identifying that and bifurcating that becomes very difficult. So we typically employ a service factor of 50%, so one employee is worth half of a resident, and that's how we account for that. That is sort of the industry standard. That might not answer your question totally or make you totally comfortable, but I've never seen a community deviate from that.
Can I ask a quick question, Councilmember Holman? Was your question, though, that are we lower, or are office and retail industrial fees lower than other communities?
It was all of that.
Okay.
It was, are we low compared to the impact that's being created, demand that's being created, and are we low compared to other communities, and responding to the response from staff, from the consultant last time, saying that our impact fees for non-residential are low.
Okay.
So it's all of those things.
Absolutely.
Can I ask?
I think it's largely reflected. We tend to view fees by category. So a park fee or a library fee or affordable housing fee. And then they roll up into a non-residential fee. So if the non-residential fees as a whole may be low compared to peer cities, within this document we can only sort of throttle up on.
But what we're looking at here is not park and such. We're looking at specifically increasing 2 impact fees, and one of them is for public facility, emergency services, basically. So there's a direct relationship.
Well, then, are you saying, is the question about the city's non-resident fees in comparison to other cities low in this regard as it relates to public facilities and public safety?
No, I do not think these are low non-residential public safety and general government fees.
Can I ask for clarification from staff on this table? Because I guess I'm reading it differently than you, and maybe I'm reading it absolutely wrong, but
What page again, Mr. Chairman?
packet page 6, that's the table that you were referring to?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman? So I could be misunderstanding this, but the way I read that is we're lower than other communities on residential, and we're higher than other communities on office and commercial. Am I? As a percent.
Because you're looking
Correct,
at the
yeah.
second table,
So
correct?
the second table,
Yeah.
so like retail industrial, we're twice as much as the average of the 8 other cities.
May I ask something that goes on?
Please, if you're okay with
No,
that.
go ahead.
I'm just trying
Go
to
ahead.
understand it.
But
There you go.
But under that table, it says total fees as percent of average home price. And why would office fees or retail industrial fees be
Right.
correlated to a home price?
Yeah.
Is that what was actually done? That the office and the retail industrial
I think
were-
you have the wrong heading on there, just.
Thank you. Just Nancy Nagel. Just to clarify, Nate's firm had, I guess in the Finance Committee presentation, had presented the residential fees as a percentage of home price. I extrapolated from that and also looked at non-residential, not because they correlate to home price, but as a way of comparing communities other than by flat dollar value. So yes, people will pay, commercial, non-residential properties can pay more in Palo Alto, possibly for the same reasons that home prices are elevated in Palo Alto. That was,
But I still don't understand
heading's not
the
correct.
average of 8 other cities on the office and the retail/industrial. What is being compared? It says that it's
yeah,
1.2%
of their average home price of all 8 cities.
No, not the home
Sorry.
price, the office piece. So
Right.
this is
It's
saying,
the average actually, for the percentages, I used per thousand, I should have said that. I used per 1,000 square feet, because otherwise it was like,
okay,
peanuts.
the fees are 1.2% of the cost for 1,000 square feet?
commercial.
The fees per 1,000 square feet of office fees, for example, are 1.2% of the average home price in the other cities.
Oh. I
Well,
don't see the
maybe
relevance.
Yeah, I don't see
A
it
general
either.
assumption, the office space would cost more
Well,
generally.
Just forget that, the top chart just has the square footage price, and you get to the chairman's point that I read it the same way, that this says that our fees are significantly higher than the average fees per square foot in the 8 other cities.
And for that one, it's for all types, so that's residential and office, commercial. Yes.
So, Chair Berman, for purposes of clarity, is where you're headed on this, Karen, that we're too low, too high, or do you want to alter what this is?
So I wanted clarification, and now I'm going to let Karen continue with her questions and comments. I just want to get clarification on those tables because there was some confusion from that.
But I need to know where are you thinking we're too low and therefore we should alter the amount?
Well, yeah, I am thinking we're too low, and again, based on even what the consultant said last time. So to go to that too, let me ask, and I did give Lalo a heads up on this stuff, so I'm not I'm not doing that. So on packet page 4, and the presentation we got this evening is a little bit different than what's in the packet in one regard, in that the presentation this evening talks about residential and non-residential development in a couple of places. The staff report, and I'm going to point to the 4th paragraph on packet page 4, and it says, staff's, starts, for example, staff's list of unfunded projected needs for parks added up to $39 million, given the, and it doesn't matter if that's about parks, I mean, I think this would apply to anything, as I read it. Given the Association of Bay Area Governments and Planning Community and Environment staff's projected population growth rates. So population growth rates, again, speaks to residential. What about our office increases and their impact? So I'm just not getting how this tracks to how we are
Absolutely.
charging the right rates for our non-residential.
Excellent question. We're looking at that differential between existing and new. And when doing it, it depends upon the data available. But the most important thing to do is to have apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And in this case, Palo Alto has great jobs data. So we looked at the existing number of jobs versus the future number of the bump to 2035. Pardon me?
We don't have jobs data.
So you have aggregate jobs data.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, relatively good data. I mean, I'm just speaking from
We
my
have
personal experience.
relatively poor data.
Okay. I respectfully disagree.
Well, let me,
when
then
viewing
let's
California
pause
as a whole.
there. Let's pause there. We have had significant community and staff discussions around the great uncertainty over our jobs data from various sources. So if you somehow suddenly have really good jobs data, everybody in this town would love to hear it.
Okay. I mean, it was provided by the city. I think I meant relatively as compared to other communities I work in.
We don't have a business registry.
Pardon me?
We don't have a business registry or business license tax.
Councilmember,
We
with all due
have-
respect, can we let him continue with the presentation, please?
Well,
And if
it's
you
a
want to poke
premise.
holes at the
It's a
numbers,
foundation
I
for the further
understand.
discussion.
I understand. And so if you want to poke holes at the numbers when that comes, then that's fine. I don't think he needs to know all the things we don't have.
I have trouble proceeding under a premise that I think is not sound. I don't know how we can go out that direction. If we start from an agreement instead, and we have staff members here that may shed light on that, that no, we don't have real good jobs data.
Sure. And so
Then we can have
my
a
question to the
discussion around
presenter, my question to Nate would be, where did that data come from? I mean, I think that will help you decide whether or not you believe that data or not.
Could I try to help? I think I could resolve it for the moment, at least. What I'm hearing you say is your impression of the data you got and the quality of it relative to the data that you get when you're in other jurisdictions was good. So in that sense, you see it as good. That doesn't mean that within our environment, we see it as good, given the fact that we've had a lot of these discussions about needing to get more specific. And I don't want to jump ahead here, but I think this is a future issue, since in non-commercial, in commercial, just like in residential, it is the number of people that really are the driver for the service levels or the fair share cost. So as a city, looking at this from other perspectives, we're interested in getting more and more accurate on the business commercial side of the employee base. And I would think that as we say, get a business registry in the future, and we're able to have much more specific counts of employees, we would automatically be thinking about potentially changing some of our impact fee methodologies, particularly, say, for example, right now there's a generalized assumption based on like 1,000 square feet. But one of the dynamics we talk about a lot is we're seeing we don't necessarily have an even distribution of employees per 1,000 square feet. We're seeing intensification of employees in a lot of places. So we want to ultimately be able to capture that increased amount, knowing that, twice as many people per square feet historically potentially has twice as much impact on traffic and facility demand and all of those things. But at the moment, we don't yet have that information in the level that we're searching for through the business registry.
Well, I'd go much further than that. One of the statements was about, by comparison to other cities, that we have comparatively good data. And we're one of a small minority of cities in the state of California that has neither a business registry nor a business license tax. Those are fundamental vehicles by which other cities gather their data. Not the only source, but very critical and in many cases the most reliable. So I don't understand how we could have better data when we lack what is probably the most valuable tool in gathering that data compared to other cities. Second, you made the statement that you got this from our staff, and I need to hear from our staff the reconciliation of Nate's understanding that he got solid data on our jobs versus what we have heard and what I understand to be our own perspective of our staff, that we don't have that data. So can we speak to those two items?
If I can make one point first, I would like to remind the Finance Committee that, again, that we're looking at that differential. So to the degree there, and I know this certainly won't satisfy you, but to the degree that there's a flaw in existing data, if it's carried through to future projections, it is equalized. So we're looking for that marginal difference.
Well, not entirely, and I'll speak to that in a moment, because this 60-40 sort of ratio may not apply here either, because our jobs to residents ratio is quite different from almost every other city as well. So we can hit that in a bit.
Sure.
But it's not just the differential moving forward, it's the baseline as well.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask staff to answer Councilmember Burt's questions to the extent they can, and then I'm going to move back to Councilmember Holman, and then we're going to keep on going through this Q&A.
Well, what? Okay, well, Lalo's saying we got the data from planning, but I actually, and I'm not piling on our consultant here at all. I don't want to make a statement that he take it too far. You know, he made a qualitative statement about the data. I'd rather get back to the methodologies and make sure. Yeah, whatever, yeah.
If we start from that premise, I'm fine moving forward. If we start from a premise that we have really good data, I'm not fine.
Okay, but let me just say this. I don't think you've drawn any of your conclusions about these recommendations based on the fact that because you're saying we have good data. You're using other factors. So you could also say, you could accept that we're saying we don't have good data. Does that change your recommendations?
No.
Okay.
Well, first, I want to be very, very clear. It's like there's no intention to pile on anybody. And that's just a phrase that city manager used, but I just want to be sure it's like, I mean, you're a consultant and you're working for us, and I don't want you to feel piled on or any of the other staff. I'm just trying to get clear on the information and the basis for the recommendation. So that's my intention. And I have questions. So let's ask one other question, and I always forget what this is. What is our daytime population? It's on our website, but I can't remember what it was.
It's about 65,000.
Go ahead. No. Well, you want the non-resident population also. Is that what you mean?
Well, the daytime population compared to the nighttime population.
I think the number
That's,
Go ahead.
Presumably, the daytime population includes workers who are here who don't live here. Is that what you mean?
yes.
Yeah. So I don't think we have good data on that. No, I mean, I really don't. I mean, we often talk about whatever it is.
There's a number that's often
We have
used.
99,000 jobs or something. We have 65,000, 66,000 residents, you know.
So I think this just goes to, and I don't know
I think-
if there's something that prevents us from doing this, but I think the scale ought to be balanced. It's like, you know, if we have 99,000 office workers and we have 65,000 residents, why are the residents paying 60% and the non-resident paying 40% of the impact fees?
I'd just like to say one thing on that, and I think Councilmember Burt was getting at this. I don't know the exact number, but, you know, even recently when Steve Levy was talking to us, right, he again reports that, you know, we have the highest jobs to resident ratio in the area or in the state. It has increased over time. It's over 3 to 1. I mean, you know, is what he had said. I mean, it's now we have to kind of control, because I think that relates to working age or being able to be, it's not just absolute population to the resident, but of those who are working age and residents. I mean, we have this incredible difference. So I think it's a fair point to say that 60-40 would not be a normal distribution for our town.
But that's what's, I think, being recommended, or maybe that was just stated as what the average is. So I'll stop with my questions right now, but I think you get my concern and wonderings about the foundation of the recommendations. So,
Did staff have something they wanted to say?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Burt.
So there are several open questions then, and this 99,000 daytime population, I've also heard numbers of 120,000.
Yeah.
And so those are big swings. Let me understand the baseline element of this. So normally you said that these fees would be 60-40 residential to commercial, correct? Is that what you said?
These fees, as calculated, are 60-40.
And that for other cities, that's a typical approximation, isn't that what you said?
I think other cities you would see a higher residential burden. 70-30, most likely 75-25.
Okay, and so what portion of, and I do want to say that the point that Councilmember Holman brought up is more complicated than that, because we certainly have a baseline of residents who stay in the community who are not working. So the higher service level is serving both the baseline of those who are residents who are here during the day and needing those services, plus the workers on top of that. So that's a more complex calculation. But what assumptions or base figures did you use for number of workers for calculating this 60-40 baseline?
I believe it was roughly 65 to 70,000 existing residents and approximately 90,000 existing jobs. And then in 2035, an additional 10,000 residents and an additional 20,000 jobs.
Okay, so if, say, the jobs were the 120,000 figure that we have also heard, the 90 is lower than any figure I've heard. And I don't know the exact number, or I don't even know the approximate number. But that's a lower number than any I've heard. So say hypothetically, instead of 90,000 daytime jobs, we today were 120,000 daytime jobs. Would that change your calculus?
It would not change the existing versus new, assuming that the projections for the future would be based on the same, but it would change the burden between residential and non-residential.
Wouldn't it change this?
Yes.
Yeah.
It would change the burden. So I'm trying to remind that there's two elements, and we're talking about the second one.
Okay,
Correct.
so that baseline would be changed.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's the thing I'm talking about. And then the proportionate increase is the second consideration.
Correct. But if it were by the same percentage as the existing incremental differential I've discussed, it wouldn't change it. So if we go from 90 to 110 and 120 to 150, whatever that gradient is doing, if it's staying roughly the same, it won't really change our burden. So that was my point earlier.
So, we have a whole variety of fees, and tonight we're focusing on the two new fees. But if the number of existing employees or workers, daytime workers, was significantly higher than you used for your assumption on the other fees, would that potentially have changed the calculus for what we should be charging commercial currently?
I would need to know the employee count at the target year.
Yeah.
I would need to know the percentage
I'm
increase.
thinking this through, yeah.
Yeah, it's really just all about the differential for, I think, with what we're discussing. Whether we start with 0 and go to 20, or whether we go roughly 100 to 120. So Excuse me, those aren't equivalent percentages. I just realized, but yeah, I think you.
Yeah, it's really a question of whether we've been charging the right fees is one question. And then what fees we should charge in the future is a second question. So it's possible that we've been undercharging commercial, or we've been doing it right. It does go to the criticality of getting this data from a business directory.
And I'm sorry, I would like to, this point may not be 100% appreciated. Non-residential fees typically a little bit savvier developer in evaluating them. So I've never seen a 50-50 split. I think that would create a fight and create a little bit of a backlash.
Have you run into other communities that maybe had twice as many workers as residents?
Oh, of course not. But
so, I mean, that's what it comes down to,
not
right?
twice as many, but you know, I've seen it. You know, maybe.
Well, we are really an anomaly in terms of the job to resident ratio. I mean, we're not typical. So this is where I struggle with just saying, well, based on other communities in this aspect.
I absolutely agree. And to my earlier point to Councilmember Holman, to say that, you know, there are certain industry practices, and counting an employee as 50% of a resident is one of them. Can we examine changing that? Absolutely. Would I be a little bit off the reservation, a little bit out there by myself? Yes. So it's something we could investigate. If there were a different service factor, maybe 2/3, we could certainly investigate and rerun the numbers. And I think there is a defensibility, certainly in a unique community like Palo Alto. I've just never seen a fee study like that.
So did you say the rule of thumb is a worker 50% of a resident?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we were 65,000 residents and 120,000 workers, then
Correct.
Then 60-40 isn't right.
Correct. But to your earlier point, who is the workers? Are they here full time? Are they leaving? Are they the same people? It becomes very difficult to unpack.
Councilmember
Okay.
Burke, I think, your concerns are understandable. One of the things that I talked to Councilmember Holman earlier is that there's still a lot of next steps for us, and one of the things you can do is just make some of the decisions based on the recommendations, based on the data that you have today, and give us the direction about coming back to you once we have more set data. And, you could say in 2 years, come back with all the fees, given the new updated demographics that we have based on the new data sets, and make that a task for us to come back to.
I would support that. I think that what I'm hearing are a couple of things. I mean, obviously, we have the ability to update and enhance our fees. Secondly, there is an established practice in this impact fee business, and to the extent that we go outside the norm, then we are going to be subject to really having our ducks in a row potentially a lot, and we're already admitting that we need to get more information anyway to do that. So that sounds like more of a future issue as far as what the absolute numbers are. And then there are all these variabilities that you're talking about within those numbers. I mean, our residents are not here full-time, and it's not all the residents stay here in Palo Alto and never leave, and it's only the workers who come here. People are leaving and going to work elsewhere themselves. So we probably, to the extent that we get outside the norm, we have to have done some sophisticated modeling on that too. That sounds like that's something more down the road than where we are right now. And I'd argue for you guys adopting improvements now and asking them to come back later for updates as we get better information than to sort of delay taking action to go get information we know we can't get right away.
Absolutely. And the staff was, I mean, good data, not good data, relatively good data. I think even this discussion is a reflection. There was a conscientiousness about the staff and the planning department about the data that they were giving me and the historical trends and the data in light of ABAG data and census data. And I don't see that very often. And that's what I was referencing, is that conscientiousness to say we don't actually believe this is right. We're not going to just accept regional data because it doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. Whether it's perfect, it sounds like it's not, but a very, very conscientious staff effort. So I'd like to thank them for that.
Sorry, one more question.
Yeah, was Councilmember Byrd? Yeah. Okay, yes. And then I'm going to ask if you guys have any suggested amendments or
Okay.
anything like that.
I don't want to put the city in jeopardy. However, it has also been acknowledged that this is a unique community, and we have published for a long time these jobs numbers on the city's website, and they've been published other places too. So, defensibility is an important criteria. I think fair share is an exceedingly important criteria. I think the residents in this community recognize that from a variety of different factors, that they're subsidizing in a variety of ways the non-residential development in the community. And it's not to diminish the value in any way of the non-residential development in the community. It's that everybody should be responsible for their fair share the best we can figure it. So I'm going to make a recommendation or an amendment to the motion that we, and this is a gentle move, but I'm going to recommend that we split the residential, non-residential 50-50 from the 60-40 that you've indicated is on the existing fees.
Okay, I can attempt to do that through.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Hold on. Well, no, it was an amendment. So would the maker of the motion?
No, and I'd like to explain why. I think the way that I have heard you explain it tonight, Nate, is what makes sense defensively. And although it's very tempting to say 50-50 would be far fairer, I don't see how we defend that in any other way. If what I'm hearing is an industry standard, and I believe it is, then we're saying, we're not accepting the industry standard. Instead, we think we can make our own standard. And perhaps in the future, that's something we could do. But tonight, I don't think it's what we've been asked to do. We've been asked to look at the data that was here that was pretty straightforward. And I think our responsibility tonight is to deliver that to the rest of the council, along with something that says, in the future, we'd like the non-residents to have far more of a burden than they do now. But I can't see a way to vote for that tonight that would make sense.
Back to Councilmember Holman.
Okay, so seeing I don't give a second on that either, I'm going to vote against this and the motion then. And what I would suggest is before this goes to council, the questions that I have are going to come up with other council members. They absolutely are. So, the questions that I've raised about what's included in the staff report, about the basis for the recommended impact fees, the fact that it was stated before at the council meeting that our non-residential impact fees are low, and a variety of other points I've made this evening, I just can't imagine they won't also come up at the council meeting. I don't know who's watching in the public, but it just, this is an issue in our community, a fair share. And I don't see this as fair share. And there's a lot of information out there about, we don't have critical data, but there's a lot of information out there about how our jobs housing imbalance is unique, far greater out of balance than other communities. And so I'm going to be voting against the motion.
Councilmember.
So I did not support the amendment, not because I don't think we may end up there eventually, but because I don't think we yet have the data to determine one way or another. As far as whether this is a new industry standard, no, I think that's a misunderstanding of what the amendment was intending. Nate had spoken about the industry standard being a worker counting for roughly half of the impact of a resident. And so this figure would be based upon having an assumption of a little over 120,000 workers. And we don't know the data. But that would not be a new industry standard. That would be a new assumption on the data from what Nate had used, is my interpretation. But let me ask, what do we think would be a timeline in which we could have a better update to this so that we could do our next iteration that may reflect the concerns that Councilmember Holman has raised?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think the primary issue is having confidence ourselves in our own jobs data. And I think that what we're doing with the business registry is the most specific, direct path that we have to that. And I don't recall, you guys can recall as well as I do, roughly the timeframes we were talking about. You know, but I mean, I really think it's a year or two from now, let's just say a year from now, where we really would feel we've collected enough data to do a good comparison to the whatever the existing baseline kind of numbers that we have. So I think that that's the more realistic time frame. Then the work that we would then have to do is how do you actually apply that? How do you factor it? And what are the other variables? I mean, let's just say that's another 6 months or something like that. But I think it is important that we have the right data. We've made the point that we need to have good data. And I really appreciate the intention here. But, you know, we kind of, something that is supposed to have a clear methodology, not being able to draw that clear nexus, to have it based on intention or our intuition just opens us up to a lot of, you know, I think we all agree that's where we need to be, but honestly, to just pick a number, it puts us in an awkward position, particularly when it's outside the norm. We very may well have somebody who's not going to ever challenge us on it. But if and when they do, and we're sitting here, I'd rather wait 18 months and have us be, heck, the number might be 40-60, not 50-50 even.
So I appreciate that in principle, although I have one remaining real concern is, and I still haven't heard any real good response tonight on how we got using a 90,000 worker assumption, because, isn't that what you said? Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Because that's outside of the range of what the figures that I have heard over an extensive period of time. So
well, we'll go back and verify.
So
that.
I could even see it. You know, I would assume that if we have a range and we don't have a good number, you might have use the mean, or you might use even a conservative number if you're worried about defending. But why would you pick a number outside the range? But Nate's not saying that's outside the range of what he understands. So that's the discrepancy that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, well, that's a reconciliation we're working on the staff, is at least to align all of the variable data points that have been generated over time. So at least to sort of have us say, even if we have methodology concerns, this is the official number. And so we could at least do that in the near term. And I think that would be something that goes beyond just this impact fee discussion.
Mm-hmm. Nate, last words.
Thank you. As a reformed lawyer, I want to say this very, very carefully and respectfully. I understand the motivation, that 50-50 target, and that's sort of the reason AB 1600 is in place. People weren't being generous and trying to go 50-50. They were trying to go 90-10 residential. And that was the impetus for AB 1600. So it creates a scenario where the tail can't wag the dog, and I can't really target a specific number. What I can do is I can work with staff about that service factor and have further conversations and potentially run some additional numbers and see where we end up. But I just want to make very clear that I'm not going to provide you something that is 50-50, just period. So I understand the motivation. I don't think anyone would ever complain about 50-50, but that would really hamstring us. So, sorry.
Lala? Nope. All right, let's vote on the board for the motion. Do we vote on the board here? I don't even know. This is my first finance committee meeting in full chambers. Should we just raise our hands? We can raise our hands. All in favor? Aye.
It's not working.
All opposed? So that's 3 in favor, 1 opposed. 3 in favor, 1 opposed, with Councilmember Holman opposed. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. We'll look for, the direction was for the first meeting in June. We'll look at the agenda and see if this can be fitted since it's going to be an action item.
Great. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 2. Agenda item number 2 is approval.
Give us some timing so I don't yell about it.
As quickly as possible.
Then let me ask in public. It would seem as though we should be done by 10:30 tonight. We've had 3 items, and the next one is one that also looks fairly straightforward. I realize Councilmember Burt knows a great deal about this, which I'll be interested in hearing. But the last one is a little more complex because it is going to involve the fire department and how we are charging. So I would simply say if we don't stay on target, it's going to be very difficult.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Moving on to agenda item number 2, approval of a power purchase agreement with 65. Let me flip to my report and remind myself what HK stands for. We're going to go with HK. 8ME LLC, oh, I guess that's the name of the company, excuse me, for up to 60,000 megawatt hours per year of energy over 34 years for a total not to exceed the amount of $130 million. Does staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Chair Berman. Valerie Fong, Utilities Director, and we have Senior Resource Planner, Jim Stack here to give a short overview. We'll try to be quick. We think it's supposed to have been loaded up there, but it's hard to see from here. Were you able to see which one it was?
So he can get into the.
Okay, if it's okay with you all, we'll just work off your hard copies, and in the meantime, if Jane's able to, I think she's giving up, log in, she can get us up and running on the screen.
I do. All right, good evening, council members. I'm here this evening to present for your review a contract for that we've recently finished negotiating for a new solar photovoltaic project. So my presentation tonight, which we can't find right now, I'll be taking you through the process that led us to this meeting tonight through our request for proposals. I'll give you an overview of the project and the contract terms. I'll talk about some of the risks that are involved in contracts such as this one. I'll briefly address how the project fits into our overall electric supply portfolio, and then I'll share with you the staff and UAC recommendation. So when we issued our RFP last fall, in the year 2017, which is when we expect all of our currently committed renewables contracts to be online, we expected to have essentially all of our supply coming from hydro and renewables contracts. 99% or so of our supply was already committed by hydro and existing renewables contracts. But that 99% figure kind of obscures the fact that there are two big assumptions underlying that. The first is that we have average hydro conditions, which, as you can see from this year, we often don't have, we have dry years, and we get a lot less output from our hydro projects than in an average year. The second assumption is that all of our currently committed renewables projects end up getting built and coming online according to the timelines that we have committed to with them. And we have 4 big solar contracts already under contract that are still being developed, and they're not even under construction at this point. They're expected online in 2015 to 2016. In order to get to that 99% level, we're assuming average hydro conditions and all of our projects getting built. And there's definitely some uncertainty around both of those two assumptions. So we issued our RFP for a new project in order to provide some insurance against both the hydro risk and the project development risk. Yes, we're on, still on slide 3. Also, just to note that prior to 2017, we still have a lot of room in our portfolio for new projects, as well as after 2020, when we have some of our contracts expiring, we have a lot more room. And we'll still need to contract for more renewables projects to meet those deficits. So in slide 4, we have a summary of the results of the RFP that we issued in September. We received a total of 92 proposals in response to the RFP. Altogether, they would provide about 6 times as much energy as the entire city uses. So we got a pretty overwhelming response, and the majority of those were from solar projects, as we've seen pretty consistently in the past few years. On slide 5, as with past RFPs, the primary considerations when we were evaluating the proposals were price of projects and the viability of the project. And to evaluate price, we use the concept of a green premium, where we compare the renewable energy price to the price of a brown energy supply, a non-renewable supply with comparable characteristics. That's to get all the projects, the proposals on a kind of an apples-to-apples basis for comparison. One thing we did differently in this RFP compared to prior years was we gave a little bit of consideration, not too much, but a little bit of consideration to projects coming online sooner rather than in 2016 or 2017. We did that partly to acknowledge the fact that we have a 2015 renewable portfolio standard target that we're trying to achieve. And also to account for the fact that last year we committed to 3 contracts for projects that start at the end of 2016, and we'd like to get a little bit of certainty around our portfolio sooner rather than later, so we're not waiting until 3 years from now to find out if these will get built or not. On the next slide, there's a graph displaying summarizing the 92 project proposals that we received. On the y-axis, we're plotting the green premium, which is essentially the priciness of the project. On the x-axis is the proposed contract start date. At the bottom center of the graph, I've circled the proposal that we're bringing forward tonight for consideration. You can probably see that this is among the lowest price proposals that we received under the RFP, but it's not actually the very least cost proposal. And the reason we chose this one over some of the other that are slightly less expensive was partly due to the bonus points we gave for projects coming online sooner. There's also the fact that this project it scored better on the viability metric than the other projects that have later start dates. It's seen as more of a sure thing to get built. So with that, on the next slide, number 7, we have a summary of the contract and the project. The project will be called the Hayworth Solar Farm. The legal entity's name is 65HK8ME LLC. The price we negotiated is $68.72 per megawatt hour. That's a non-escalating price over the entire contract term, which is an extremely attractive price. It's slightly lower than the prices we negotiated for the 3 contracts last year, which were then the best prices we'd ever negotiated. It's also a great price given that this project comes with local capacity in addition to the energy it'll provide. We'll be able to count the project's capacity towards our local capacity requirements. The project will provide local capacity credit. So we have requirements under through the California Independent System Operator. We have to procure a certain amount of capacity that's located in load pocket areas, highly dense pockets of development, and like the Bay Area and the Fresno area. in the Bakersfield area. So this project will provide capacity that we can count towards those requirements. So that's a pretty valuable product that it provides us at no additional cost. So that's something we considered when we were evaluating this. So this is a 25 megawatt project. It will provide about 6% of the city's total annual energy needs. The contract term is for a base of 27 years. And then after that, there's a 3-year option that either we or the developer can exercise. And following that, there's a 4-year option that we, as the city, can exercise at our sole discretion. It's due to come online in about a year. It'll be located in Kern County, just outside Bakersfield, on some previously disturbed farmland. And in terms of the development progress, it's pretty far along. It's a highly viable project. I should note that this is going to be part of a larger 90 megawatt group of projects that they're developing, this company, and they already have contracts with PG&E in Southern California Edison for other pieces of this greater project. So I think that it kind of enhances the viability of the whole collection of projects. It's going to be developed by 8-Minute Energy and in cooperation with Saferay. And Saferay has a North American headquarters here in Palo Alto, I should mention. On the next slide, slide 8, I wanted to spend a moment to address some of the risks that are involved in contracts like this. This is a 30-plus year contract at a fixed price for a resource that doesn't exist yet, so there's obviously some risk involved. And this table kind of lays out those risks and some of the measures we've put in place to address them. The first one is counterparty credit risk, which is the risk that the company goes bankrupt and the contract falls apart. And the way we've addressed this is through the power purchase agreement structure. We only pay for the energy that we actually receive after the project is built. We don't have to put up any money up front when we sign the contract. The next one is development risk, and that's the risk that the project just never gets built or is built, but it comes online later than expected. And to address that, we've negotiated that the seller will put forward a development security of almost $1.9 million. And that's money that is going to be in a letter of credit, but we get to hold on to that money and retain it if the contract gets terminated, or if the project comes online late, we get to retain a portion of that money. Likewise, if the project comes online, but it starts to have trouble, it starts to break down and doesn't supply as much energy as we're expecting, the developer will be putting up a $2.5 million performance deposit, and we can draw on that for damages if the project fails to perform. And with those two deposit amounts, I should mention these are significantly greater than we've negotiated in the past. So we're taking a bit of a more conservative approach and making sure that we're covering all of our bases. The last risk is just that we end up having some buyer's remorse and regretting signing this contract if prices fall next year. And there's really nothing we can do about that. We're going to be locking ourselves into this contract, but it's a great price, I think. The next few slides I have in the presentation speak to how the project fits in our overall portfolio. So on slide number 9, I have a graph showing a long-term view of our renewable supplies. And the project that we're proposing is shown in the shaded bars at the very top, starting in 2015. The graph also has 2 lines. The bottom line shows the amount of renewable energy we need in order to hit our RPS target of 33% starting in 2015. And the upper line shows the amount of renewable energy we need in order to achieve a carbon neutral supply portfolio. As you can see, this project gets us above our RPS target and gets us a long way towards meeting our carbon neutral goal. One thing you might notice is that for 4 years there, starting in 2017, adding this project to our portfolio could put us in a position where we have additional energy supplies above our need to reach carbon neutrality. So I guess that's an optimistic scenario. This graph assumes that we're going to have average hydro conditions, and it assumes that we will have all of our committed resources that are in our portfolio right now coming online, coming to fruition. Average hydro conditions, right. So that's sort of an optimistic scenario. And in the event that scenario occurs and we have surplus energy supplies, we certainly have the ability to sell those to the market, either on a forward basis or on the spot market. We also have the option to sell the RECs, the renewable energy attributes that come with these projects, the renewable projects. We can sell them with the energy, or we can retain those and bank them for future years where we might have a deficit of renewable energy. So that's covered in slide number 10. Slide number 11 touches on the issue of the hydro uncertainty a little bit more. This graph shows how the portfolio would look in 2017 with this project added to it, as well as the 4 solar projects that are expected to come online in the next couple of years. And it shows how the portfolio would look under dry, average, or wet hydro year conditions. So you can see that even with this project added to the portfolio, there's certainly the possibility that we could be in a position in a dry year of still having to go out and make additional purchases of renewable energy to meet our load and meet our carbon neutral supply goals. Under average or wet conditions, obviously we'll have some surplus energy to sell into the market, but this is essentially what we do currently. Even now, there are some months in average hydro years we have surplus energy supplies, and we sell those to the market. So adding this project to the portfolio is not going to dramatically change the way we manage our resources. It'll just mean we make some additional sales and make fewer purchases going forward. Next on slide 12 is a table showing our, kind of summarizing all of our renewable energy portfolio. Our committed resources are shown, the ones that are operating as well as the ones that are still in development. So altogether, our commitments will take us to about 49% of the portfolio coming from renewable energy. I'm also showing the green premium, showing the relative cost of the projects. So our earlier contracts are less expensive. They actually have a negative green premium of about $300,000 per year. The ones that are being developed over the next couple of years have slightly higher cost. So altogether, the committed green premium as of today is about $1.6 million per year, which equates to a rate impact of 0.17 cents per kilowatt hour, which is significantly below the half-cent per kilowatt hour rate impact limit that Council has set. Adding the Hayworth project to the portfolio will take the total renewable supplies to about 55% of our overall electric needs, and it'll have a green premium of roughly $330,000 per year, which would take the overall portfolio to a green premium of about $1.9 million, or 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. So lastly, on slide 13, I just wanted to wrap up by making the case that now is a very good time to be in the market to buy renewable power. We have a need for this energy under our carbon neutral plan and our RPS goal. Particularly for the period before 2017 and after 2020, we have large holes that we still need to fill with additional renewable energy purchases. And right now, I think it's a great time to buy because the large investor-owned utilities are mostly sitting on the sidelines. So there are some very good projects out there that are highly viable and have great prices because there aren't too many buyers in the market. Also, that this project is able to give us such a great price because it's eligible for some very generous federal tax incentives right now, and for projects that come online after 2016, the levels of the incentives will be a lot lower. They're going to be significantly reduced, so project prices are going to increase for projects coming online after 2016. So finally, I wanted to show you staff and the UAC. Our recommendation is that the council approve the contract for the Hayworth Solar project for up to 60,000 megawatt hours per year of energy for up to 34 years. We're recommending delegating the authority to the city manager to execute the PPA and the 2 extension options, as well as waiving the investment grade credit rating requirements, which we've done for all of our renewable PPAs to date. And we're recommending waiving the anti-speculation provision of the energy risk management policy as it may apply to this PPA. And our next steps are to take the contract to council next month for consideration. And then, of course, we'll be continuing to monitor the progress of all the projects in our portfolio as they come online. And After this, we may, it's likely that we'll issue an RFP again sometime later this year for projects that will start delivering energy to us starting in roughly 2021 when we have some contracts expiring. We need to replace them going forward. So that's all I have. So thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. I want to open it up to members of the public. If anybody wants to comment, they don't. So I'm going to turn to colleagues and open it up for questions and comments. Councilmember Burt.
Well, thanks. This is a very interesting report. And it's really a remarkable project in that it is both so cheap and scheduled to come online so quickly. This is the lowest cost renewable we've ever had as a contract before us. Is that correct?
It's the lowest solar project we've ever had before us. We have some earlier wind contracts, and I think one or two landfill contracts from about 10 years ago that we signed up for.
And why is this able to come online so quickly? Have they started construction already?
They haven't started construction, but they've been developing the project for a number of years, getting all their permits in place and their suppliers lined up. For solar projects of this size, they estimate it takes only about 4 to 6 months to actually construct the projects.
Okay. And the federal investment, it's the ITC, right?
That's right.
Isn't that expiration in 2016, isn't it the commencement of construction versus completion of the project? Or is it, you had said completion of the project?
Yeah, for solar projects, they have to come online. They have to be completed by the end of 2016. They changed the rule. You might be thinking of wind projects being eligible for the production tax credit. They changed that rule so that projects that are being constructed by the end of 2013 are eligible for that. They changed the rule from being online.
Okay, so it's online.
Yeah.
So this is, as a result, we have a very narrow window of a couple of factors that you described. One is that the investor-owned utilities have booked the projects to hit their 33% renewable requirement that's mandated by the state. There's been a lot of discussion about the state increasing it to a 40% mandate, but that legislation hasn't gone through. So these developers of large projects in California have very few customers, and a city like ours is one of the few customers on the market. And yet these developers can still take advantage of the federal investment tax credit if they can get it online in 2 years. So
That's
that
correct.
convergence, along with the underlying reduction in the cost of solar panels themselves. So it's like 3 factors converging to make this a screamer deal.
That's right. And I've actually heard that prices for panels are starting to come up, so we may have timed this just right to get the actual bottom of the market.
Well, yes, but there's 2 factors on that. One is the intrinsic cost of producing a watt of solar. That continues to go down. The other is that the industry has been operating as an industry in the negative, at a loss. And so they're starting to move back into a more normal mode. So that's the reason it's going up is not because the cost of producing a panel is going up. That continues to go down. It's that they actually are looking at making a profit.
That's right.
For the first time in a long while.
Yep.
So that means that the long-term trend is likely to continue to go down on panels with, over the next couple of years, we may see some variance in that.
That's true.
So this makes it a great deal. If we overproduce renewables beyond our needs, we could also sell not just the power, but the renewable credit. Is that correct?
That's right. There's a pretty good market right now for renewable credits on their own or renewable credits bundled with power.
So say we were to sell the renewable credit, if we're paying 68 cents a kilowatt, that's right, on this? And we're able to sell the credit, what effectively are we paying for this? I mean, that subsidizes the 68 cents, is that right? From what we'd pay for it, we'd pay 68 cents. We get to sell the power plus the credit.
Right, so it's 6.8 cents that would be
6.8
paying for it
sorry.
per kilowatt hour.
6.8, sorry.
Yeah. Market prices for plain electricity are around 4 or 5 cents. If we package the credit with it, you can get an additional 2 or 3 cents. So it's conceivable we could end up, selling these supplies and, actually making a little bit of money off this. So that's not why we're doing this.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to count on it, but that's very plausible.
Right.
Okay. Well, I would like to then move the staff recommendations 1 through 4.
Second.
Councilmember Burt, would you like to speak to your motion?
Just in summation, this is a really good deal. One of the points that I didn't bring up and ask about is we had talked about expiring contracts in the future for our renewables. Some will come offline. And so this also, if the other projects all come online and we have this, then that creates a backstop where we're actually starting to book contracts that would carry us through better the period as our oldest renewables contracts end. Is that correct?
That's correct, yep.
Good. So it has that benefit as well. This is really great. I don't know any utility that has been able to fill its renewable portfolio in recent years with as low of cost of renewables as we have. And I think that's something that we should be proud, not only that we've having a 100% carbon neutral portfolio, which will be with this hopefully over 50% defined renewables and the balance hydro, but to do so at one of the lowest costs for that portfolio anywhere. So that's a great achievement. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Ennis, would you like to speak to your second?
I would certainly associate my comments with those of Councilmember Burt. I read through this today with great interest and thought it sounded absolutely like a very good deal. I hope it's as good a deal as it seems to be. But you presented it well, and I think particularly on slide 9, that talks about what it could be in surplus was very persuasive. So congratulations on finding what looks like one of the best deals out there, and let's hope it comes to fruition.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holman? Nope. And I'll just second what Councilmember Burt and Vice Mayor Ennis said. All in favor of the proposal?
Aye.
Aye. So that passes unanimously, and thank you to staff very much for the presentation. So we're going to move on to item number 3 on the agenda tonight, which is the first responder fee and treat and no transport fee.
Councilmember Burt, Chair Berman.
Whoever I am.
Whomever
That
you
guy.
are. Am I reading this correctly? Looking at the fire chief, you are simply looking for a recommendation for us to go out and do some research, correct?
Correct.
That is correct.
This is
Good
not
evening.
action.
Correct. Good evening, Eric Nickel, Fire Chief.
Good evening, Chief.
It's been a long day.
No.
I hope I can make this complex item very simple. All that staff is asking the Finance Committee to do is to provide us with some direction to start some community outreach and start the dialogue, particularly with segments of the community that utilize our service. You've heard me mention in front of this group before, about 50% of our ambulance transports are generated by the majority Palo Alto residents that are age 65 and over. So that is really our target group in terms of this outreach. We've already established some really great community connections with our strategic planning process, but would want to continue that dialogue. The second purpose of me being here tonight, and this may be a follow-up conversation at a later Finance Committee meeting, is to start the dialogue with the Finance Committee and ultimately the Council on some really important policy decisions as it relates to paramedic.
I'm going to interrupt real quick. Can I ask the folks in the back of the room just to take the conversation outside of the chambers?
I don't think they're hearing us.
Hey, Herb.
Oh, out.
And could you guys continue the
can't hear
conversation
anything.
outside of the chambers? Thank you, guys. Sorry, Chief.
Thank you. The second conversation that we want to start with the Finance Committee is some really important policy decisions on how we treat cost recovery for the use of paramedic resources, not only on ambulance transportation, which we currently bill for, but for paramedics that are on the engine companies that respond, oftentimes are the first ones there, begin rendering treatment, utilize medical equipment, or in instances where a patient that we respond to at the scene goes against medical advice or doesn't need to go to the hospital. That would be a refusal of care, or what we would call a treat and non-transport. Currently, under the existing policies of the cities, of our city as well as many cities across the United States, the only way that we can cost recover is by transporting somebody to the hospital. Long-term, under the Affordable Health Care Act, we want to provide other options to our community members that maybe don't need to go to the hospital, or that we can treat at the scene and release, but still recover a nominal cost for the services of the fire department. So what I wanted to bring to this group's attention is just that we want to start the dialogue with the community right now. We're not talking about implementing any fees. The fees that we would come back to this body for first responder fee, and that would be a paramedic on an engine company or on a ladder truck that gets to the call first, assists in that, and then that patient is transported to the hospital. That fee is proposed right now to be $150 or $200. And in many cases, that is cost recoverable through the insurance companies. The treat and no transport fee, where we render maybe a higher level of care, where they're a little bit longer, we're proposing a fee in the range of $375 to $450. Now, we've sort of adopted the philosophy, and I heard Councilmember Burt talk about it before, about the public benefit versus the private benefit. And the dialogue that I want to have with this group here, from staff's perspective, is we view the use of EMS resources, particularly on individual care, as getting a private benefit. We have the ability under Medicare, we're allowed to bill insurance companies for the rendering of this treatment. Versus a situation where we render treatment, we render care, we render aid, and there is no way to recover that cost. So we do have some really good data. I mean, I heard the conversation earlier about the data for some of the fee structure. So just roughly, we're cost recovering about $3.1 million right now for ambulance transports, and that's on about 3,500 transports per year. About 60% of our calls are, and this is fiscal year 2013, are Palo Alto residents, and 40% are non-residents. So again, the philosophy that we've talked about is when somebody utilizes the EMS service, I differentiate that from the use of the fire service. And here's an analogy. If a house is on fire, and we don't go and take action, that fire could easily extend from one home to more homes and threaten the entire community. Versus the person who is having a heart attack in their house, their heart attack is not going to spread to the community. So this is an individual, almost as if it's a utility type fee, that we are going there, responding to them, rendering care, taking them to the hospital. Now, what does the county do? What does Santa Clara County do? So Palo Alto Fire is a little unique and a little special. This year we are celebrating our 40th year of paramedics in the fire department here in Palo Alto. There are very few agencies that can say really anywhere in the United States that we've had paramedics this long. When we got into the service in the 70s, we became grandfathered by virtue of the state. So the authority for emergency medical services care does not rest with the cities, but with the county. Except for those special agencies like us that were doing this prior to June 1st, 1980. We are a grandfathered agency. The county has a limited control over our exclusive operating area. Now, here's where it gets a little different. In order for us to maintain what are called our 201 rights, we cannot receive any funds from the county to support the paramedic service. All of our funds have to be paid for out of the general fund. So what we're looking to do is offset these costs in some limited instances where we don't transport somebody to the hospital, but we still can recover some of those costs. Now, we don't want to do this unless we've talked to the community, we've gotten their input, and we have an implementation plan, because this is a different way of doing business. Now, there are several agencies within the Bay Area that currently do this, that currently charge these first responder fees. The other reason that we're proposing the first responder fees is long-term, so really important components of the Affordable Health Care Act are now starting to take place. It is incentivizing us to do things more than just take people to the hospital. That's very expensive health care. We want to be in a position for our residents that perhaps don't need to go to the hospital, or can be treated and released at the scene, or treated and maybe taken to some place like an urgent care in a different situation other than an emergency room, and charge them a different fee. Because right now, the only way we can charge and recover that fee is if we take them to an emergency room. This sets us up really for that community paramedic concept that is now being discussed really within our industry, and trying to be on the forefront of that, of rendering care to particularly our elderly residents that are trying to maintain independence in their homes. So it's very multifaceted, but really all that we're asking for tonight is just some direction to go out and start that conversation. But I also want this group to know that we would like to have a policy conversation around, do we want to charge these additional fees? Now, even under the best of circumstances, we will never recover 100% of our costs. So I look at what the taxes that the community pays, that pays for the standing army, ready to respond and respond in a timely fashion. And our response times are significantly better than the county ambulance provider. So our 90th percentile response time, as it's noted in the staff report, is 8 minutes, whereas the county provider is 12 minutes. So Palo Altans get a much higher level of care already. Now, the last thing that I want to leave you with from a policy perspective is, I personally feel that the taxpayers should not be subsidizing the insurance carriers if we do not attempt to recover these costs for our service. And as I mentioned before, even under the best of circumstances, we will never recover 100% cost recovery, and I don't think we should. So it costs us about $2,500 to run one medical call, and that's a 3-person engine company and a 2-person paramedic ambulance. At best, we're recovering $1,800 to $1,900. Even with these first responder fees, we would be in the $2,000 range. So that kind of concludes the comments that I had. And again, I would just try to summarize a very complex issue by saying we're looking for direction to move forward. And if this group wants to have the policy conversation this evening, I'm certainly open to answering the questions. I would probably would need to come back with some additional information based upon the questions you have tonight. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Vice Mayor Niss?
So why don't we make this plan tonight? I could spend an hour on this with you, and I don't think that would be appropriate, especially at 10 o'clock at night. But this is very complicated, and it's much more complicated than it looks on the surface, and something that, as you know, the county deals with extensively, and I can't think of anything I spent more time on than this kind of thing and how to price. So as I would start down just the list of questions, and what I'd suggest is, why don't you jot them down? You and I can talk about them. We can bring them back at some other time. But to begin with, and I found it interesting that you said 60% of your calls are residents, 40% from non-residents. And I'm going to presume that that's tracked pretty carefully. You know who that is by who lives here, who doesn't live here. But one of my first questions would be, what's the average age? Because you've mentioned Medicare in here several times. I'm guessing the average age is probably, especially for the residents, an older resident, and probably for your non-residents, a more average one. But I wouldn't be totally sure of that. But usually that is the pattern that's followed. As far as how to collect those fees, as you said, Medicare won't reimburse for first responder, but certain treatment and transport fees, those are tough to collect, as you know. It's hard to document, it's hard to go through the paperwork and so forth, and that probably would take a whole new set of documentation that would have to be filled out as well by the person to whom you're responding. Very tricky as to rendering aid at the site, and then again, the refusal of care, the against medical advice. That's again a really difficult one to deal with, and I know that the people who work for you are very responsible in dealing with that, but I know that there were times that we used to hear that people tried to refuse and it didn't happen, and I know you know cases like that, and those are very tricky. And I think one of the biggest things you deal with is what aspect of providing this kind of service through fire is appropriate for a community. So I'd really like to see, sounding like Karen did with our first one, is how do we compare with the other communities? And I can pretty much go through the ones in District 5, but I know you can as well. But I'd like some general idea of what that's running. And for the rest of you, you probably know that county fire covers a lot of the other cities in District 5, which are the smaller cities here in the north part of the county. And there's probably always going to be a long discussion about what it's worth. So, and I'll put it right out there like that. It is cheaper to use county fire, and it's cheaper to use a number of other responders. But as you have said tonight, and I think this is what our community expects. They expect us to have our own police and fire, and they expect the response time to certainly be 8 minutes or less. So it would be good to sit down and talk about this and talk about where the responsibility lies within your community for this kind of care. I know that if somebody is sitting at a coffee shop downtown and they choke on their donut or whatever they're eating that they ought not to be, that you will respond very quickly. But once again, it's always difficult when you're dealing with out-of-town folks as well, as far as where is the insurance, and they're going to be furious when they discover, my gosh, here's what it costs to go, then here's what it costs to be at Stanford or whatever hospital they went to, and I know you deal with those, and it was something we certainly dealt with frequently. Having said all that, I would still say having this kind of service in our community is one of the most important we provide. There's almost nothing more important than what you provide that is life or death. When somebody is having a heart attack in front of you, or they're choking, whatever it might be, you want that paramedic there, and you want them there in a hurry. So that's my piece. And we will talk offline as well, but I think that comparison information is what I'm really interested in as much as anything else, and that doesn't say that would influence mine, I think, or other long-term decisions as well. So thanks.
Councilmember Holman.
Yes. Thank you for this, and thank you for the verbal presentation, Chief Nickel. I have a few questions, and one is clarifying, so help me with this one. So I think you said the suggested, or at least the tentative, fee for treatment would be like $150 to $200, and that is the current transport fee $375 to $400? Is that what you said? I kind of wasn't quite sure on that.
The current transportation fee under the city's municipal current fee schedule for paramedic level support is $1,725, and then we would bill for mileage and oxygen, and that's a flat rate.
So what was the $375 to $400?
So that was the proposed rates that we were talking about, just to kind of give you an idea that it was significantly less than the transportation fee. You know, most of the agencies in Northern California that are billing the first responder fee are in the range of $350 to $450 dollars.
Okay. And Vice Mayor Niss mentioned the fact that, and you mentioned in your presentation too, and it's in the staff report, that Medicare won't reimburse and private insurance companies do. There's also a group of the population that doesn't have insurance. We hope the Affordable Care Act will cover some of that or pick up some of those people. Are there any exemptions that you would talk about with the community?
Yeah, that's another of the policy discussions that I didn't mention in my verbal report. Looking at comparing ourselves to other agencies that do bill for these types of services, there are provisions that are clearly delineated that allow the fire chief, in conjunction with the finance director, under certain instances to write off or waive these types of fees. So currently what the city will do, if somebody doesn't pay their fee or can't pay their fee, we'll attempt to work with them, put them on a payment plan. If they refuse to pay, the city will do one of two things: either write those fees off ultimately as non-collectible or attempt to collect in small claims court. But I would suggest that as part of our policy conversation, that we do strongly consider some cases where people who can't pay, or another instance would be somebody's crashed their car, they're uninjured, but somebody else called 911. We come out, we examine them, maybe they have a cut, they're fine, they don't want to go to the hospital, and now they get a bill, and they never called 911. In those instances where they would write a memo or write a letter to the chief, that we would have some process to perhaps waive those fees. But that's another of the policy conversations.
Well, I would strongly suggest there be that conversation with the community, and that would be a preference that I would have, because if you're in a low-income situation, or you're a senior and don't maybe have, you're an elder senior and you don't have maybe other support, the last thing you need is to be dragged into small claims court or get harassing letters and that sort of thing. So we want to be a compassionate community.
We'd like to take a very different approach, and you've heard me say before that 17% of our population, 65 and over, utilized as our service, represents 50% of our ambulance transports. Mm-hmm. And you've heard me say that as a portion of community risk reduction, mm-hmm. we want to assist these residents and use fire prevention and emergency medical prevention principles to maintain independence. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where my heart is at, is keeping them in their home as long as they can independent, and supporting them in very small ways that only the fire department or paramedics might be uniquely qualified to do.
Thank you for that, and appreciate the perspective.
Councilmember Holman,
yes.
Let me just add something, because I think it's important, that the observation you're making, and just to tell you what the practice is. From time to time, a case comes up to my office where somebody is saying they can't afford it, and I've set up payment plans of $5 a month. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, that's going to take me forever. I said, well, if that's what you can afford and that's what it's going to take, that's what we'll set up. So, we don't have an exemption policy currently, and that's obviously something for you to discuss. But I just wanted you to reassure you and the rest of the committee members that we do work with people. We understand that they're in a difficult situation.
I appreciate that too, and also look at, I appreciate that approach very much, but also look at, is it financially feasible to be sending a bill out for $5 a month? And does that really affect cost recovery or not?
We don't bill at that point anymore. It's a commitment that they make a contract. They sign an agreement saying that I will pay you, and if I fail to make payments, then you'll resume collections. Okay.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Could you tell me remind us actually what the transport fee is based on, that $17.25?
So what the transport fee is the fee was set before I got here, but what these fees are typically set upon, so Medicare in this country drives the majority of reimbursement, and every public and private insurance is really based upon what Medicare says, and the key phrase that we have to live by is reasonable and customary. So in order for us to arrive at this number, we have to go through a very detailed cost analysis using Medicare forms. and it factors everything, the direct costs, the medication costs, the disposable equipment costs, all the backup and support costs, and that all gets factored in about a 50-page report to where you ultimately get to, here's what it costs for you to run this type of call. So we could attempt to recover 100% costs. Our fees would be about $2,500 per EMS call. Looking at some of our agencies in the area, we would be significantly higher and potentially at risk for Medicare saying your fees are not reasonable or customary. So those are really the items that go into deriving that 1725. So just for example, to compare us with county ambulance, so their base fee is $1,163. Seems like a lot less than ours, but then they bill for every piece of expendable medical equipment. So their average fee so if they use oxygen or tubing or give you a Band-Aid, give you some medication, they're gonna charge you for every single one of those. We don't. We bundle our charges as one. So if you look at their average fee, it is very close or sometimes exceeds ours. So we're definitely in that range of reasonable and customary with our partners. I am hearing from the county EMS administrator that they expect the county ambulance provider to come back and ask for a fee increase because, as you heard me say about this time last year, they had some significant financial challenges.
That's all very helpful. One of the concerns that I've had about the transport fee, though, is that it might be impetus for some to refuse it because the fee is significant. So we don't need to go into that now, but it's been a concern of mine. So, and to be quite honest, I have a little bit of a mixed feeling about this. It's like, and I think you all do a fabulous job. I think we're very, very lucky to have an outstanding fire department here. I have a little bit of a mixed feeling, though, about the cost recovery component of this. Part of me feels like, well, this should just be a service that we provide to our residents and 40% non-residents. But it just seems like that's a service we ought to be providing. Maybe that's too altruistic of an approach, but that's sort of how I feel about it, to some extent at least. And the thing that you mentioned, just to kind of get it out there, the thing that you mentioned about being personal care or private care, if somebody has a heart attack in their home, well, but if you are involved, I think you gave the examples, like if you're in an automobile accident, well, an automobile accident can be compounded and compounded and compounded, so, that's really more in the public realm. Anyway, I guess I do support your going and doing the research, but I think it's very important to some of the data that you gave us tonight, I think is important to put out there when you're going out and doing this research. And one of the questions I think that should be asked is, if the 1725 is a deterrent from people to getting adequate care that they really need, is there some way we could balance that with some minimal cost of on-site care? So I think those are, let me just do a quick scan here of, oh, yes, the staff report, you described much better in your presentation than in the staff report why the Affordable Health Care Act is encouraging more non-transport care because emergency room service is very expensive. So I think clarification of that, or maybe a little eliminating of that, would be good. And I think those cover my questions. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Burt.
Yeah, thanks, Chief, for the report. So there is a philosophical question of, historically, this has been essentially a community service. And we're now saying, for a combination of reasons, we want to reconsider how we would structure these fees. First, with the reimbursement, when we do deliver to hospitals, what percentage of that is typically reimbursed by private insurers and Medicare? And if you don't know, I can hear about that later.
Well, we're incredibly fortunate here within Palo Alto that our payer mix is the envy of probably most of the United States. Most everybody within Palo Alto that we transport to the hospital has some form of health insurance. Almost everybody we transport off of the Stanford campus, the students are required to have insurance, and the faculty and staff all have insurance over there. So our collection rate is somewhere in the 80-85% range, whereas the national standard is 40 to 50%. So, and it's just due to likely the affluence that we have here in the community. Now, the Affordable Health Care Act is going to ensure that anybody who wants insurance has insurance. Now, that may not pay as much, but the people that are uninsured or were previously uninsured now have some form of insurance. So we do quite well in terms of our cost recovery for ambulance transportation.
So then, on the first responder fee and the treat and no transport fee, you mentioned that the insurers will cover, was it both of them? But Medicare neither? Did I get that right?
Correct.
And so when coverage, if Medicare patients have extended care coverage, does that typically cover it if they get supplemental coverage?
Yeah, and there's a lot of work that's being done on the state level to allow publicly funded fire agencies to recover under a Medicare provision. It's called GEMT, Ground Emergency Medical Transport. And so we're actually starting to recover some funds from that. It's essentially taking, it allows us to recover from these patients that we wouldn't have been able to cost recover from before.
Through Medicare?
Through Medicare.
And you mentioned that under the Affordable Care Act, we have all these new incentives for non-hospital delivery, but so we have this, those incentives, but Medicare not really covering this. So it's kind of a contradiction in that.
Well, and
sense,
here's the other concern. You heard me say earlier, we bring in $3.1 million with our ambulance transportation revenue. I fully expect under the Affordable Health Care Act, that number is going to drop. There are disincentives to use ambulances to transport people to the hospital. So if that revenue is going to drop, and again, this is probably 4 to 5 years out that we start to see this, and they are incentivizing us to treat them at home, keep them at home, I'm trying to ensure that the revenue that we lose on the transportation side, there's an opportunity for us to gain revenue on the treating them at home or treating them and taking them to a different location.
Well, in particular, if what you're saying is that we're shifting our service to do more of that treat at home or take them to another place. It's not just a recovery. You're going to have some new expenses.
That's the business side of that. The heart side of the fire chief and wanting to care for the community is we want to not take them to the hospital. We want them to stay at home and be independent. And if there's a way that we can do that, much like we've done with fire prevention, and prevent the call from occurring, then we all win.
And if we chose to consider it, is it permissible to have two different rate structures, one for residents and the other for non-residents?
We are required to have the same rate structure for both. Yeah.
Okay.
And that would be a federal. That's a federal law.
Okay. And I want to thank you for that clarification on that the county provider charges for a whole bunch of supplemental costs, so that you said that the average cost for an ambulance service as opposed to the base level fee is comparable.
Correct.
And you think they're going to come for a sizable increase or some significant increase this coming year?
We've already heard that, and because of the operational changes we made where we minimized their transports here into Palo Alto, we've reaped the revenue of that, but they've lost that.
And do you expect that we'll have any increases in fees this coming year?
I expect county ambulance to do that.
No, I mean for Palo Alto's fees.
Well, it's based upon the fee study and the first conversation, and I defer to Lalo on that one.
And finally, just a question that I know gets raised in the community a lot. You mentioned earlier that we have the EMS vehicle and a engine that typically arrives at a health emergency. Can you clarify why the engine necessarily is sent as well?
So the engine functions in a role as a first responder. We have 6 engines and 1 ladder truck versus 2 full-time staffed ambulances and 1 that's cross-staffed with an engine company. So we just have more of those resources out there that are strategically deployed out in the community.
So they get there first.
The engine company gets there first. Our 90th percentile response time for the engines is about 6 minutes. So they're getting there much quicker than, say, the paramedic ambulances are.
And once the paramedic arrives, does the engine stay?
Depends on the severity of the call. If you look at sort of the tasks of all the work that has to get done, typically that crew of 5, most of them are working very, very hard to get that patient packaged and ready to go to the hospital or rendering treatment there at scene.
So that's informative, and I think that that's information that we should look for ways that we can help the public be educated on that.
Yeah, and Lalo just, mentioned something to me as well. I mean, some of the operational changes we've made is getting the paramedics on the engines to get the paramedics delivered to the call even quicker. Now, we don't have a gurney to take them to the hospital yet, but the critical life-saving interventions are happening much quicker than they had before.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief. I want to talk just for a second. I'm not going to expand upon, it's been a good conversation. You guys have brought up a lot of good questions. I heard the chief say the word policy a lot during his presentation, and that kind of made me realize that I'd like to get clarification from staff as to why this is coming to, I understand that from the fee perspective, that's why this is coming to us, but I can't help but think that this is a policy change also, and wonder if that should be going to policy and services and not us.
It's a good question, and I think where we left it, and I think it ties back to the discussion earlier tonight, where you heard some of your colleagues say, well, the finance committee discussed it. They're the ones that discussed the policy, the methodologies. The rest of us have not. So we always felt that this has stayed within the finance committee for now before it advanced to the full council for discussion. So you're going to have more of these type of policy decisions, we'll call them, for the various fees. And the component that the chief talked about, which is the outreach effort. And really, we just want to make sure you know that that's what we're attempting to do, so you're not caught off guard with what is staff trying to do in terms of some of the cost recovery levels and discussions and potential policy changes that come out of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Mr. Chairman, it's a little bit of a judgment call too. I mean, to go to 2 committees or one versus the other, that's at this level of sort of previewing us doing research, and the council agendas are so busy, it just didn't seem worthwhile. But it is helpful for us, I think, on something like this, to get a bit of a public relations and a political read even from you, on something that could signify a change. We know it doesn't speak for the whole council, but we're just going out to do research, and then ultimately we'll come back to the whole council if there's legs to this.
I mean, so under next steps, it says, after completion of the outreach of stakeholders, staff plans to return to the finance committee with a summary of stakeholder input. Is that the plan, to come to us and then come to full council, or will you be going to full council?
Correct. We unless you give us different direction, we come back to you, because it's still a finance item in terms of setting a fee and a recommended fee, and then potential policies for any exceptions to those charges.
Okay. Then I'll go ahead and move the recommendation. I guess it is a motion that we direct staff to reach out to stakeholders regarding the implementation of a first responder fee and a treat and no transport fee, and return to the Finance Committee with the results of the outreach plan and a recommendation for fee amounts, cost recovery levels, annual fee revenue estimates, and a fee implementation plan.
Second.
Seconded, I'm giving it to Councilmember Holman. I don't need to speak to it.
I do just a tiny bit here because I have a couple of other clarifications. And I had it in my notes and didn't ask it previously. The stakeholder group isn't, unless I read it and forgot it, isn't very clearly called out. I mean, seniors would be, of course, a part of that. And it doesn't say, like, how large a pool. So, I mean, you're not talking 10 people, I know, but are you talking 100 people? Or just kind of give us an idea of what your thinking is. And would that pool also be reserve value in talking to, say, other, like Stanford Hospital, El Camino Hospital, whatever, to see what their input would be on a different approach?
So,
Not different approach on trying to do more care in-home or at the scene as opposed to transporting.
so not to totally tip my hand, but we are having those conversations with Stanford Hospital right now about jointly doing a pilot project on a community paramedicine project, and what that potentially looks like. And they've even offered up potential funding sources, so it would be at no cost to the city to experiment like that, much like the way we got into the paramedic business in partnership with them 40 years ago. To answer your first question, you know, I sort of envisioned a cross-community stakeholder group, probably in the 100 to 200, probably a couple different conversations facilitated with different groups. We do the community outreach group, a database that we used for the fire department's strategic plan was 80. We had about 40 people show up for that, so we have those good connections, and they sort of already feel like they bought into you know, the strategic planning process of the fire department. But I haven't given that, quite honestly, a whole lot of thought, like a number, but I do want to have multiple sessions across the city. I would likely reach out to you for potentially some names of people who are, you know, in favor, and some people who you know, have some concerns about it. Certainly Avenidas, groups that deal with a lot of, you know, older populations and populations at risk.
And I was thinking, I'm glad you're thinking about a larger number, and also I presume that you'll be talking to people at, like, say, Palo Alto Commons, Channing House, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, happy to support the recommendation. And, you know, like I said, I kind of have this altruistic view. It's like Councilmember Burt said, too, a little bit of a mixed feeling about this. But I think it's worth finding out how we can approach this to the best advantage of everybody. Thank you.
Oh, I should have my mic on. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, staff. That passed unanimously. Meeting, we have, that's right.
I'll make it easy for next meetings.
Perfect.
Tabitha is going to give you the calendar of
All right.
the next meeting, so
Thank you.
you can read it at your leisure.
Thank you very much, Lalo. And we're adjourned.